Main point of this entire overview is that the patient's not getting anything back, and they're the ones spending the money. They're spending money into their health plan. They're spending money at the pharmacy. They can't afford their medication. The pharmacy's getting somewhat of a short end of the stick, and everyone up here is just inflating prices, making more money. And we're back after after a 2 week little vacation, little breather. Welcome back, everyone. How's your Thanksgiving?
Thanksgiving was pretty good. It was nice
Yeah.
seeing you actually on Thanksgiving to
Oh yeah.
kind of hang out. Yeah,
Oh,
we've
no.
been on a hiatus for about a couple weeks, but we have a lot of interviews that we're working on the back end to release, and then a couple of our podcast episodes that we're releasing as well. So yeah, just a lot of editing to do in the back end. I never realized how difficult it was to edit videos.
It does. It takes a lot of time, right? It's just time and like kind of figuring everything out, figuring out clips, figuring out, what exactly needs to be highlighted. And there's a lot that goes into production that we never saw the value until we actually did it. So I have mad respect for people that have, 3,000 episode podcasts because it takes a lot.
I don't think I told you this, but I had to talk to our regional coordinator the other day. I talked to her students. She gave me
Oh
like a
yeah.
30-minute notice about coming to talk to her students. I was like, okay, I'll show up on Zoom. And the whole time, our regional coordinator is just asking, what is Bitcoin? She just doesn't understand it at all. And it was like a very funny conversation. You could see the students in the background kind of laughing because I think they kind of understand what it is, but
Yeah.
it's like boomer technology.
It's just funny that she was so engaged to open dialogue, but then didn't really know what Bitcoin was.
So just for the audience, the regional coordinator is essentially who our preceptor or sort of like our professor was in pharmacy school. They're usually the one who sort of guides you on what to do. Uh,
During rotations, like the
yeah,
last
during
year.
rotations.
Yeah. So yeah,
She's
we've actually
delightful.
we both had the same regional coordinator because we went to the same site. So it was interesting seeing how it all panned out with two
Yeah.
different classes, and But we got a lot of topics. We actually have one main topic that we're going to be discussing today. It's going to be drug pricing. We're going to kind of take you guys through how pricing is set for medications and for drugs, and kind hoping to untangle or at least shed some light on how drug pricing is done within the U.S. and how it compares to other countries. It's a very dense topic, so we'll try to break it down to the best of our ability. But it is going to be a lot of information. So definitely be one of those episodes where you go back and rewatch to kind of get a better understanding. I'll go ahead and bring up the main article.
Yeah, we're going to red pill the audience today when it comes to talking about how our drugs are financed in America. It's absolutely mind blowing. That's all I'll say.
Definitely pulling the pants down of the drug industry, or the prescription drug industry. So the topic is following the money, hoping to untangle the U.S. prescription drug financing. Very, very nice pharmacy right here in this picture. Not a lot of
That's
meds.
actually that's a very well organized. Compared to mine, my shit would be overflowing at my pharmacy.
Dude, I have like drugs that are double stacked because I just have no room on the shelves.
Yeah, me too. So, okay, actually, on the bottom, I don't know if you had this problem, but sometimes the drugs fall all the way to the bottom, under where the supporting beams are, and I'll find it like 4 or 5 years later. I'll be like, how did this drug get down here? It's like a $5,000 drug.
No, I have like all of my shelves have lips on all ends, so it's like and everything's connected. Like this is all staggered. This kind of pisses me off a little bit how it's all staggered, but mine's like all in one line. I have a little bit of OCD, so everything's very organized. But yeah, my shelves definitely don't look like this. All right, so let's get started. So this is just a quick intro. Um, we're going to be giving you an overview on how medications are priced within the US, how that compares to other countries, and just kind of how convoluted this whole system is. So just to give you guys a little background, If you look right here, compared to other nations, the United States has the highest per capita prescription drug spending for over a decade. It's about $1,400 per American. That was a metric from 2021. And just in comparison, they did a comparison to the next highest grossing country, which is Germany, for drug spend, which was 36% lower than the United States. American prescription drug spending was about $378 billion in 2021. And healthcare spending, which accounted for about 9% of total healthcare spend, which is about 1.6% of the total GDP of the US. So just throwing those numbers out there, what do you think, James? Is that a lot?
I think
About
it's
fourteen
actually,
hundred bucks?
yeah, I mean, per capita, like highest per capita in prescription drug pricing, I think it says it's about 1,400. I've actually
Right,
seen some articles float like 3,000 to 4,000. So that number I think is a little bit underreported. I think it's a little bit higher.
right.
But I do agree with the sentiment that prescription drugs are really expensive, only in America and nowhere else. It takes up 1.6 of a United States GDP. I actually believe that it's such a huge market,
Yeah.
huge.
Have you gone, like, if you've gone to other countries and just, I don't know, sometimes when I go to other countries, I'll just walk into a pharmacy just to kind of see how it's all operating and how it is, a lot of things. And I'll just ask for random drugs and just the prices that I hear. I'm like, I have to ask a second time. I'm like, wait, did you say that right? Is it really just that much? Compared to you go to a pharmacy here and it's like 30 pills cost 150 bucks. Go to like Mexico, those same 30 pills cost like $1 or $3 or $5. So it's crazy to see.
Yeah,
But
no. When I was in Europe, I went to Switzerland. I visited some of the pharmacies there. I mean, stuff out there is really cheap. Visited some in I would say the UK. Yeah, super cheap out there. Asia is even cheaper. When I was in Vietnam, when I was in Thailand, Japan, like medications are really really cheap there.
well, the thing is, a lot of there's like a little blip in this article, but I think about half of the generic medications that are manufactured are done overseas in India. 50% of everything that comes into the US in terms of generic medications are all outsourced, manufactured out there, and then shipped to the US at much lower cost. And then obviously the prices get spiked up when it comes to the US. But the main reason we're going to be talking about this today is because of the Inflation Reduction Act that's been passed, that's going to take effect January 1st, which is going to lower out of pocket spend and overall cost for a lot of Medicare patients. Just to do a little overview, so the new Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, is going to be, it's essentially setting the precedent and the price to where out of pocket spend cannot be more than $2,000 per year for Medicare patients, compared to the thousands of dollars that they're spending right now. So it's going to have a cap at that. And then all the insulins and things like that, I think it's capped at $35. So it's going to bring out of pocket spend for Medicare patients down quite a bit. And I think that's setting a really good precedent to kind of renegotiate drug pricing for commercial plans and pretty much every other insurance and plan that there is. I just hope to see that there's some change on the commercial side too, not just the Medicare side, because there's a lot more people that are insured under commercial plans. But as you can see right here, 1 in 3 adults that are taking medications simply can't afford their medications due to cost, which is a really high metric. A lot of these are life-saving treatments and therapies that patients need, which ultimately, if they don't get, it has a downstream effect of their health worsening and them needing more medications.
Yeah.
Um,
I wanted to chime in. You said the Inflation Reduction Act, it's going to be great. We're going to be spending a lot less money, for Medicare as an entity. But I
right,
think the key distinction to make here is, Medicare is for people who are 65 and older.
right,
Every time we have a paycheck from our employer, 2% of that goes to Medicare.
right.
So as an entity, yeah, for the next 5, 10 years, it seems like Medicare is going to be paying a lot less. Pharmaceutical companies are going to be, receiving a lot less money, because Medicare is ultimately renegotiating things. But I think a lot of people forget that people who are not on Medicare, which is, ages 18 to 64, what I like to effectively call the working class, they're the ones who are going to get shafted from the Inflation Reduction Act. It just seems like no one's really talking about that part.
No, I don't think anyone's bringing it up
Yeah.
because they're so focused on I don't want to say the rah-rah, but that's what it is. It's just the hype of, a certain patient population having less spend but then the rest of us are biting the bullet for that, and no one really brings that up. So the overall, savings that they're predicting over the next 10 years is about $100 billion compared to the trillions
Who's
that we
saving
spend.
that though? Is that Medicare who's saving it, and is that pushed back to everyone else who's on Medicaid and commercial?
No,
So
of
I
course
mean,
not.
like I'm very passionate about this sort of subject because it just seems like no one's talking about this. But these
Right.
drug companies, they're not going to just take a 30% loss on revenue. They're going
No.
to find a way to offset that, and that's usually going to be from drug rebates that are going to the state Medicaid programs, to self-funded health plans and commercial payers and large businesses.
Yeah, so in order to kind of break that all down, we have to really understand how drug pricing is set to begin with,
That's true.
and and the
Yeah, go
different
ahead.
components, because there's so many components that go into how these prices are set. Normally, you would think, for any other product, like let's say you're going to the store to buy a T-shirt, there's the cost of making the T-shirt, importing it if it's not made here, and then how much the customer pays for that, and then it's all split up, and everyone gets paid an X amount. There's not really a quote unquote loss, so to say, right? But we're going to expose within the drug pricing and within the pharmaceutical industry, a lot of it's just a loss. Somebody's biting the bullet one way or another, and we have to figure out who it is and how we can kind of prevent that and see if there's anything that can be done. So just to give you guys kind of an overview, there's a nice glossary here of different terms and things. Manufacturers, obviously the companies that make the medication. Pharmacy benefit manager is essentially a middleman in this entire thing. It's a middleman entity that contracts with health insurance plans to develop and administer pharmacy benefits, including in negotiating with drug manufacturers to develop a plan's formulary, as well as negotiations with pharmacies to develop the plan's pharmacy network. So essentially, within this whole drug pricing scheme, the PBM controls mostly everything. They get to determine how much they're going to pay out. They get to determine and contract with certain insurances to see how much they're going to pay. And then they also get to negotiate rebates for manufacturers, and then ultimately what the pharmacy is going to get paid out and what the patient's going to pay out of pocket. So they have a lot of control in terms of drug pricing. Wholesalers are the people that sell the medications to the pharmacies. The formulary, which is negotiated and set generally between the plan and the PBM, that's like a list of covered drugs that are covered under the plan and the insurance, and then what's kind of out of their benefits. We're going to expose a little bit about tier structure. So within each insurance, there's certain tier structures where lower cost medications are covered at a certain tier, and then as higher medications cost more, they have a higher tier structure, tier 2, 3, or 4, which will be a higher out-of-pocket cost for the patient that's going to be taking the medication. Again, out-of-pocket costs are just what patients are going to be paying at the pharmacy for their medications. Spread pricing is something that's going to be pretty interesting. It's generally the spread between what the pharmacy is reimbursed, and then what the PBM actually pays to the plan, and ultimately what the plan pays out, and then whatever that quote unquote spread is what the PBM takes in as a profit.
You got to give an example of spread pricing. I love giving examples of spread pricing.
Go for it. Yeah, give me a solid example.
All right, imagine you're Medicare, and I say, Medicare, here's this drug. It costs $100. You'll say, okay, I'll pay for it. And then I'll go and return and go to the pharmacy and say, hey, guys, my patient needs this drug. I'm going to give you $1 for it. I collect 99, and that's down the middle. That's effectively the PBM. And that's a pretty drastic example, but that's essentially what the PBM industry does to pharmacies.
Yep. In a nutshell, that's what it is in a nutshell. So yeah, like I mentioned before, so it all starts from the manufacturer, right, where the medications are actually getting made. So what that takes is raw materials to actually manufacture and make the medication, and then you bottle it up and then you sell it to your wholesaler. Well, these drug producers and suppliers are really, really highly concentrated, which by default, if the supply is limited and there's a bottleneck, all these medications are coming from a certain area. So if there's any shortages or anything, we're kind of stuck and limited to getting these medications from these manufacturers, which are overseas, if they can't make the medication or they can't meet the demand, well, then we're not getting the medication shipped out to the US, and therefore patients can't get their medications. So just a crazy metric here. In 2021, India was a source of nearly half of all pharmaceutical ingredients used in US prescription drugs. This level of concentration leaves the US market particularly vulnerable to shortages, which have real devastating effects on patients. Now, as of October of this year, there were about 128 active drug shortages in America. I think that number is now higher to about 300. And about 90% of these are chemotherapy drugs that are essentially life-saving. And if patients can't get them, they can't get their chemotherapy, cancer's going to get worse, eventually can lead to death. So just let that sink in for a bit. 50% of all raw materials and all medications are coming from overseas, and that's putting a huge strain on life-saving therapies and medications that patients in the US can't get. Patients in the US that are paying into their insurance for, paying their hospital bills, everything, yet they're not getting the optimal therapy. That just alone seems a little off-putting. What do you think about that? You think it's beneficial to have medications manufactured in the US, or is just the cost just way too high?
I mean, the cost to do business in America, it's really expensive.
Right.
Talk about unions. That's the first thing. That's a really big factor of employment and wages. In general, I think the corporate tax is much higher here than it would be in India.
Right.
The cost of labor in India is absurdly cheap. You
Right.
try to pay someone, minimum wage here in, let's say, California, you could probably hire like 10, 15 people in India for the same
Oh yeah,
price.
more,
Probably more.
100% more. Yeah, you have a whole team working for the same amount, but
Yeah, it's the thing is, there will always be a need for production to be overseas. But I
right.
do think America is sort of in this position where we've been so reliant on subsidiaries outside the country to take care of a bulk of the manufacturing.
We saw
It's
that
just
during
always been.
COVID, right? It's like we were all trying to get supplies and masks and gloves and all these things, just essential things, and we couldn't get anything. We couldn't get masks from anywhere. We couldn't get gloves from anywhere. We couldn't get hand sanitizer. Couldn't get toilet paper because everything comes from overseas. So there was a huge choke point and bottleneck for just essential supplies. So now think about that in the pharmaceutical drug industry. If there's certain raw ingredients that all of a sudden countries can't get, that's putting a huge downstream effect on all the patients in America and all over the world taking these medications. But I don't think that's going to really change anytime soon, just due to cost.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Like, from what I understand, there are some hedge funds and I would say opportunistic companies that will purposely buy out ingredients of a drug and they'll stop producing it so they can effectively raise prices or demand for another drug that they have on their portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard of these sort of situations, and it's not surprising to me. We did see this, I think, with Daraprim to a certain extent. But yeah, I mean, there will always be a need for overseas manufacturing, no matter what.
Yeah. Well, we're also going to talk about that too, about the patent law and all that, and how that kind of plays into effect. How these new medications are coming out that are supposed to be better, when in reality they're just same medication bottled in another packaging. But let's dive into the flow. So this was a interesting blurb. To start out, patients with insurance premiums generally pay X amount to their insurance plan for their premium, and then there's a percentage of that that's out of pocket. So to start, patients with insurances pay a premium to their insurance plan and make out-of-pocket payments to a pharmacy to purchase a prescription drug. These out-of-pocket expenses are based partly on their insurer's formulary, which defines co-payments and co-insurance amounts from different drugs based on tier structure. However, patients without insurances or patients who find it cheaper and more affordable to not use their insurance at the pharmacy will generally pay directly out of pocket. There's a lot of different products that are there to help lower these costs. GoodRx is one that we all know. ScriptSave, WellRx, AARP, and Howdy as well. All are there to definitely help you lower your prescription drug costs. One thing that GoodRx and all these other ones don't have is that the patient doesn't get anything back, but with Howdy you do. But with most insurances, generally these PBMs, they administer everything. Like I said, they control the entire landscape. They specialize in negotiating these prices with the plan, with the manufacturers, with the pharmacies, and generally what they do is they leverage how many clients and patients that they have within their formulary plan, and they can generally lower the amount of reimbursement that a pharmacy gets, how much they're going to pay out to the plan, because they have an X amount of volume. So the higher that volume goes, the more that they'll leverage those clients and those patients and essentially everybody that has that insurance plan to pay out the pharmacy, to pay out the plan less money. The convoluted thing, though, is that a lot of these big plans are also owners of, a PBM as well. So United Healthcare and Optum. United Healthcare is an insurer. Optum is a PBM. What gets even crazier is that CVS, which is the largest retail pharmacy chain, they have CVS Caremark, which is their PBM. So essentially, they control the entire landscape. And if you're not, as a pharmacy, if I'm not contracted with Caremark, I lose access to hundreds and thousands or millions of patients that I could potentially serve because I'm not in contract or I'm at a network. So if you're in network, there's X amount of pricing, like you would get reimbursed $20 for a drug. If you're at a network, you'll be reimbursed $10 for that same drug, but the patient's going to end up paying $50 for that same drug at your pharmacy. So that spread pricing that we were talking about, that just gets wider, and the PBM generally makes more money. So
yeah, I also want to point out, we're not talking about on today's, a podcast, but we'll talk about this on the next future one. Cigna and Humana are trying to a merger right now.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, it's going to be huge.
So isn't it crazy that just, there were so many of these little PBMs, little entities and plans, and now they're all just kind of merging into one, two, or three. I don't know where that line is drawn to where it kind of becomes a monopoly. I don't know that
monopoly.
It already is, yeah, but clearly.
The thing about all these insurers is that they're completely vertically integrated.
Right.
They control so many industries down the chain of like all these healthcare payments.
Right.
From hospitals to medical practices to the benefit managers to the pharmacies to the mail order pharmacies. And some of them are trying to get into home health next. There's a lack of competition.
Well, it's not just a lack of competition. It's a lack of competition and then a lack of transparency as to how all this works.
Sure. Maybe I should say it's just all the powers have been consolidated into a few major players.
Right.
And whoever has the gold gets to write the rules.
Yeah, that's how it is. Whoever's holding the bag, right? They got to control how everything's done. So let me just do a little overview of how drug formularies are built. So formularies are a list of medications that are covered within a patient's insurance plan. This is generally negotiated and created between the plan and the PBM. So the PBM builds their formularies by negotiating rebates with drug manufacturers. These rebates are typically a dollar amount that the manufacturer will reimburse the PBM for each dose of the medication dispensed to patients in the health plan. So within these negotiations, PBMs generally seek higher rebates, and manufacturers want their product to be placed on a lower tiered benefit plan so the patient can afford them and ultimately purchase them because the cost is lower. However, the PBM has a greater negotiation power for a drug when the plan that the PBM represents has a higher number of enrolled patients, which is what I was explaining before. And when there's other equivalents or therapeutic alternatives that are generally a lower cost. So what a PBM will do is they'll create this formulary tier structure where the lower cost medications will be at a lower tier, which means more people can afford them. But the higher cost medications and a lot of branded medications are on a higher tier. So just to give you an example, there could be anywhere from 3 to I've seen 5 tiers. But copays for a tier 1 drug, which is a low cost generic, can be about $11. But tier 4 drugs, the same, the copay would be about $116. So that puts a lot of financial burden on the patient who's ultimately taking the medication. And the patient has no control over this. The doctor prescribed a certain medication that's the best therapeutic outcome for this patient, but they can't afford $116 every month to pay out of pocket. So what do? They use something that's suboptimal, or they don't take anything at all because they need to save the money, ultimately leading to poor health outcomes. So
But that part's really disgusting to me.
Yeah, because it's just it's all about the money.
What
Which
role does like a prior authorization have to play here? Is it pretty like encumbersome for a doctor to fill these out to say get a drug covered on a certain tier?
yeah, 9 times out of 10 it is. We like just speaking from personal experience, we help a lot of offices do their prior auths, but you have to also understand these doctors have 15 to 20 minutes per patient and they're seeing, 20, 30, 40, 50 patients or even 100 patients a day. To have to do a prior authorization on top of that and then submit it to the plan and then if it gets denied, do an appeal. It's not just a 1 or 2 day thing. It's something that can take a few weeks up to a month or two. Like I've seen a drug get approved for a patient 4 months after it was prescribed. So this patient's waiting 4 months to get this medication. It was like a Hep C medication, which they need to take and they need to complete their therapy. But to wait 4 months for it to get approved after constant back and forth, like a lot of offices and a lot of office staff at these clinics and doctors' offices, they don't have time to do this. And so they're just like, all right, we'll just pick whatever's covered. And then, hopefully it still does a fraction of what it's supposed to do, which is just gross. It's like you can't just prescribe what the best treatment is and get it approved and get the patient what they need. There's so many different things that go into this. But I thought this chart was really cool. So it's just giving you an overview of about $100 that's spent on a prescription drug. So let's say you go to the pharmacy, you spend $100 at at any retail pharmacy for your medication. The manufacturer, which makes the medication, will get about $41. Insurers will get about $19. Production costs to actually make the medication is about $17. Pharmacies get about $15, which I think is overstated.
That's
PBMs
completely
get about
overstated. That's very
yeah,
overstated.
but crazier, PBMs get $5, which I think is grossly understated, and then wholesalers get
Wholesalers.
get two
Yeah.
dollars.
Okay, let's dissect this because this doesn't make any sense to me. The manufacturer gets $41, but does that include the production costs? Like, what makes the production costs different from the manufacturers here?
That's what I'm saying.
I would think these go both hand in hand.
Well, the manufacturers, that's what they're getting paid. And then of that, $17 went into the production cost, which is raw materials, running the machines, paying the staff to make the actual medication. That's their production cost. But my question is, out of that $41, is it 41 minus 17? Or is it 41 plus 17 for the production cost? Because then the manufacturer is making what, $58? Which I think is also grossly overstated because the manufacturer is not getting $58 of this medication.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. It says pharmacies are earning $15, right? Is
Right.
this with the cost of the medication, or is this like the net, meaning you've already paid for the medication? This is the profit to the pharmacy. Because I think $15 is very high.
It's definitely not the profit. I can tell you from experience, it's not the profit.
This just doesn't seem right, and there's just no way to really analyze $100 in the prescription workflow here, because you have people who pay out of pocket. That
Right.
stuff doesn't get reported. I mean, PBMs wouldn't be involved in that sort of situation.
Right.
Insurers wouldn't be involved.
But so that's just overall. Now, if you look at brand name drugs, now manufacturers are making even more. Insurers are still making about $19. Production costs is still about $17 or $18. Pharmacies over here are making $3 and PBMs are making $2, where the wholesaler is making $1.
So my question is, what's the difference between insurers and the PBMs?
The insurers are the plan, right? That's the health plan. The PBM's like the middleman. So
The insurers are the ones who's spending the $100 here.
correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So why
Yeah.
would they earn 19 from $100 that they're spending? Or is that
So
a rebate that we're not looking at?
so we're gonna go further down. There's another even crazier chart that I'm gonna show you guys. It's actually a flow chart, which you'll see that this entire first figure one kind of makes no sense because it's redundant. There's a lot of redundancies, but I definitely don't think on branded medications. Yeah, pharmacy's making $3. That's about right because
That is.
yeah, or it could be lower. I know some medications that cost $3,700 and their insurance reimburses you $36.88, so you're losing $12. But generic drugs completely flips. So pharmacies are making $32 on generics. Manufacturers are only making $18, which I agree. Generic manufacturing is often cheaper. Production cost stays the same. Insurers roughly get about the same, and PBMs make a little bit more, so do the wholesalers. This is fairly accurate in terms of wholesalers, manufacturers as well. Pharmacies definitely aren't making $32 on a generic medication. I can tell you that. It's more like anywhere from 32 cents to like 10 to 15 bucks max. But yeah, I don't think this is any of this is 100% accurate.
This doesn't seem right to me.
But what this is saying is that manufacturers ultimately set the cost, which is true to an extent, but the PBM really controls how much is getting paid out to everywhere. So let's just look at this little thing right here. So consider a hypothetical drug listed by a manufacturer as $1,000 of wholesaler acquisition costs, which is what the wholesaler will pay to the manufacturer to get the medication. So that's set at $1,000. The wholesaler may add a 1% or a $10 to the price, so they'll sell it to the pharmacy at $1,010. The pharmacy will then mark up that drug and add a dispensing fee for a total of $1,200. So when the drug is dispensed, the patient has a $50 copay. So the pharmacy will bill the PBM the $1,150 and collect the $50 from the patient. At the same time, the PBM negotiates a $500 rebate with the manufacturer and keeps 10% of the rebate. So they're making $50 out of this entire profit and spread pricing, which means that the rebate reduces the insurer's cost, which is the actual insurance plan, to pay out to $700 instead of $1,150. And then the reduced cost to the insurer affects the patient's premiums and any cost sharing. This is an okay overview, in my opinion.
I feel like the last part is materially false. It doesn't make sense.
The rebate reduces the insurer's cost from $1,150 to $700, or the reduced cost affects the patient's premiums.
Both of those to a certain extent. So yeah, I mean, you're spending all this money, but does it really reduce premiums and the share of cost? Typically, these PBMs, when they get handed these rebates, like they treat it in one or two ways. It's either income or it's going to be applied to another program within their own health plan.
Well, it definitely doesn't reduce the premiums that the patients are paying, because every year your health insurance premiums go up. Yeah. So if this is designed to lower those premiums, how come the premiums aren't ever lowered? Right?
Yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like... I always hear that argument, oh, it's here to reduce premiums, but...
Where are my reduced premiums?
How much? By how much?
I mean, a lot of that money just goes into these PBM's pockets at the end of the day. So this is the chart that I thought was really interesting. So just to give you guys an overview, we have the manufacturer up here, the wholesaler here on the left, the PBM here on the right, the pharmacy here at the bottom, patient at the very bottom, and then the health plan, which is the insurance company. So let's go tab by tab. So the manufacturer, they're the ones that's gonna, have the patent on making the medication, manufacturing the medication, and has the FDA seal to make this medication in the first place. We're gonna look at the contract terms right here first in purple. So PBM will negotiate that, this drug that the manufacturer is making is gonna be on formulary for this health plan. The actual money that flows, which is the green, which I think is the craziest thing, the manufacturer has a rebate that they provide to the PBM. The PBM then reimburses the pharmacy for this medication at a certain fixed rate. The pharmacy then purchases the medication from the wholesaler to dispense it to the patient. The wholesaler then pays the manufacturer for the medication that they purchased at a bulk. And because they're purchasing at a bulk, the manufacturer will generally give them a discount. Now, if you go back over here to the right side, the PBM also has rebates that they'll give to the health plan, and the health plan will pay back to the PBM whatever's negotiated in terms of the payment. So as you can see, a lot of this flow of funds is going to and from the PBM. But if you look down here, the patient is only paying the pharmacy. The patient's not getting anything back at all in this entire thing. And the end consumer in this entire web is the patient, the person that's actually going to be taking the medication, the patient, the people that are actually spending the money to get the medication and that ultimately need it. So the further down you get in this chart, the short end of the stick gets worse. The pharmacy and the patient, in my opinion, get the shortest ends of the stick. You think that's pretty accurate?
True. Very true.
Yeah. So in terms of PBM transparency and oversight, the pharmacy is at the mercy of the PBM, because if you don't contract with the PBM, then you can't participate in their network. If you can't participate in their network, you can't serve these patients and dispense medications to these patients, because their cost is going to be astronomical versus it being negotiated within their insurance plan. Rebates are given to the PBM. Rebates are then passed through to the health plan, and the health plan will pay a PBM a certain amount, which then gets paid to the pharmacy. Patients will pay whatever out-of-pocket costs or sharing that there is in the form of copay or co-insurance to the pharmacy, which brings this out-of-pocket tab from the health plan to the patient. So pharmacy dispenses a drug to the patient. Patient will pay an out-of-pocket cost to the pharmacy. PBM will give a certain reimbursement to the pharmacy, which will often not cover the cost of the drug. And the patient pays their premiums to the health plan, which then gets passed through to the PBM. And then this just kind of highlights, the regulations and the government negotiation. But overall, this overview, my main point of this entire overview is that the patient's not getting anything back. And they're the ones spending the money. They're spending money into their health plan. They're spending money at the pharmacy. They can't afford their medication. The pharmacy's getting somewhat of a short end of the stick. And everyone up here is just inflating prices, making more money, and not passing it down. Now, all these PBMs say this cost saving that they do, they pass it down to the health plan, that gets passed down to the patient. Where in this chart do we see any money being passed back to the patient?
Yeah, I mean, you don't see premium refunds every year, like
No.
to the patient. Because I think people would care more about that than, oh, do I have an additional coverage and weight loss, or this benefit? Most people don't really give a shit, to be honest.
No, they just want to get their medications.
More money back in their pocket.
Yeah, which up until now, there hasn't been anything that gives any money back to the patients, which I think is absolutely absurd.
There isn't any business model that does that, which is the craziest thing to me. When we were talking about Nihadi, we were like, this is actually a really good idea, but why is it not done?
Yeah, it boggled my mind that the fact that it hasn't been done yet, or nobody, I don't know if no one just thought of it, or it's so complicated that people don't want to take time to understand it. I don't know. But I just feel like
that's a whole discussion we can get into.
Yeah.
Whole discussion.
But yeah, so this is a general overview of how drug pricing is. If you just look at this chart, out of the blue, the first time I saw this, I had to stare at it and make sure everything made sense. But this is a simplification of a complex web on how drug pricing is ultimately determined. The rest of this is just, patient abuse or patent abuse. So this is kind of interesting in terms of patents and how they're given. So manufacturers of brand name medications can set their price for products at exorbitant rates, whatever they want to set, because it's a new medication. And there's exclusivity protections under the FDA for this approval process. So a US patent protects an inventor for about 20 years after the patent's filed, and the FDA approval grants anywhere from 5 to 12 years of market exclusivity, depending on the type of medication. So manufacturers can price these drugs at whatever they want because they have exclusivity over the entire market. I don't know if you remember, I don't really remember this, but in 2014, there was a Namenda, which is an Alzheimer's medication. It used to be an immediate release formulation. And right before the patent was about to expire, they took the IR version off the market and they created a new version called the extended release version to get a brand new patent to have, market monopoly, essentially. And it also pushed the launch of the generic for quite a while. But this is generally what most drug manufacturers do. Their patents are about to expire, so they'll change one thing about the medication, like IR to ER, or change one molecule, and all of a sudden it's a little bit better, and they get a whole new patent. So they have market exclusivity for another 5 to 12 years. Do you think that's something that should be standard practice? and that should be allowed.
That is the standard of
It
practice right
is,
now.
but should it be
That's what
allowed?
the entire pharmaceutical industry does. Should it be
Right.
allowed?
No.
That's a question of ethics that we're talking about, right? There's never ethics in business, ever.
Right.
But I mean, if you're going to do the right thing, you obviously have a drug. You've already made your money. You've already secured your bag, bringing this new drug into the market.
Right.
There has to be a moment in time where you say, hey, look, this drug needs to be cheaper and more affordable for everyone else there. That means we have to produce this with more competition. And yeah, but, we live in a capitalistic sort of economy. It's just not going to happen.
Well, and no, here's the thing. Like, I also I understand the opposing view too. Like, drug manufacturers are businesses, and we live in a capitalistic society. Businesses need to make money. They have shareholders that they need to report to. They have to produce profits. I totally get that. And if there was a society where it wasn't capitalistic, it would not be. We wouldn't have what we have today.
I agree. Yeah,
but it's how far of this extent do we go and allow that I think needs to be in question.
I think the other thing to consider here is that it takes a lot of research and development just to put a drug onto the market.
Yep.
I don't know the exact statistics here, but if a manufacturer researches a drug, they might have about 10,000 different variations of a drug. Maybe one or two will make it to like phase 1 for, a study of the drug. And of that, only a small subtext will actually get approved by the FDA.
Right.
So you're burning a lot of money as a pharmaceutical company trying to research drugs and determine, all right, well, is there something here that we can market that's safe and effective and, actually can treat people? I don't know how you make this part cheaper. I think if you address the R&D portion and you're able to reduce costs somehow, I think drugs should ultimately be a lot cheaper. So, again, you don't want these companies to be making up that shortfall of all these funds that they're burning. The life cycle of a drug is very long.
Yeah, and I understand that. But here's the thing, like, a lot of research and development is literally trial and error. So you're putting billions, hundreds of billions of dollars into developing, a new novel medication. But 99% or even higher is just it's a wash because it didn't work right or it didn't pass, the different stages of approval process. So it's a lot of money that goes in, and they have to make and recoup all that money back, which they do, tenfold or 100-fold. But I don't know. I think a lot of drug manufacturers get a lot of heat that they don't necessarily deserve because they're the ones putting in all the time and effort and research to manufacture these medications. But I think the middleman is what kind of takes.
For sure.
Yeah.
The middleman,
they're the ones fucking it up. Yeah. They're fucking everything over, dude.
In this industry. They do absolutely zero work and they say, hey, you're going to get paid this much. We're going to get paid that much. And by the way, you're complaining too much. We're going to pay you a little less.
Yeah. And if you don't want to take part, well, then that's fine. Other people want to take part, so you guys don't have to, and therefore you won't get anything.
I mean, look, if I was an owner or shareholder of a PBM, I'd be ecstatic. It's such a great business model.
Right.
You don't have to worry about labor. You don't have to worry about cost of goods sitting on your shelves. There's no inventory turnover that you need to worry about. You don't have a long product life cycle. You just manage prescriptions and transactions. It's a great model.
No, you're moving the money around. Yeah. I don't know if you remember that one funny Kevin Hart bit where he's like, I take my money out of my left pocket and put it in my right pocket. That's exactly what I think a PBM is doing.
I just wanted to point something out because we were talking about drug manufacturing, and I came across this interesting blockchain sort of business model. But essentially, you would lease out your GPU or your hashing power to a program that would mimic a drug binding to a receptor. Okay. And certain universities would have different criteria of like, all right, here's this sort of drug or molecule that's, theoretical. What would it be like if it binds to a serotonin receptor? What would be the downstream effects? Obviously, that requires a lot of computational power. So I just, came across, I don't remember what the project name was.
I remember this. I remember seeing it.
It was very fascinating to me because I was like, I've never seen anything like this. You could just lease out your GPU if you're not using it. And, you can run a few different experiments and hopefully one of them changes the world.
Well, I think there's a lot of utility and value to something like that because you wouldn't have to necessarily do a lot of this physically. Because right now, a lot of R&D is physical stuff. It's like, all right, does this bind to this? Does this, it's a lot of animal studies and a lot of things like that happen. But if you can figure it out in theory and then use just that proven theory or, whatever worked, and then use that and apply that in a physical setting, I think there might be a lot of savings that you could do in terms of the actual manufacturing and research and development process. But I think that's also all theoretical too. It could have good utility. Yeah, we should figure out the name of that project because I totally forgot. We gotta look it up. But yeah, so the PBMs, the one thing I want to highlight with the PBMs was this right here. So, for example, rebate agreements between manufacturers and PBMs are often confidential, which means that the PBM is essentially a black box. There's no transparency between how much rebate is negotiated between manufacturers and PBMs, and the PBMs don't have to say anything. So they could say, all right, we're going to tell everyone the rebate's $100, but in reality, the rebate's $400, but we don't have to expose any of this. And that $300 spread is just going to go straight into the PBM's pocket, which is disgusting.
Yeah. So, one of our viewers actually commented that most PBMs are moving to a much more transparent model where they're doing 100% pass through on the rebates back to the plan.
You think that's really going to be 100% pass through? Let me ask you this: you've been having X amount of revenue, and all of a sudden you have to, pull your pants down and show everything. You gonna show everything, or are you gonna hide something that you can?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So, what's the game theory here going to be? Do PBMs just say, "Look, we'll do 100%, pass through"? We'll probably make less on transaction fees, but we might have to offset this loss by introducing a new fee or maybe imposing DIRs on pharmacies.
That's what they have to recoup their revenue somehow. If you're used to having so much revenue and all of a sudden that drops by 40-50%, like there's already too much infrastructure within these PBMs in place. They can't afford all that. Yeah. It was the PBM Pharmacy Benefit Manager Reform Act, which was passed, which is supposed to be prohibiting any kind of spread pricing and requiring 100% of rebates be passed through to the plan. So it's already been proposed. I just don't know if it's going to pass or if it already passed. We should definitely look into that.
Yeah, Pharmacy Benefit Manager Reform Act. That'll be one to follow.
So that was pretty much it in terms of, there's something else that I was trying to look at. No, that was pretty much it for this. I don't know if that helped and brought any transparency. We definitely broke down certain things. I feel like I'm a little just as confused, because this is complicated, man. And anyone that's just trying to understand it would be like, what the hell did I just watch and read and try to break down?
This is a very boring topic. I'm not going to lie. No one really cares about how drugs are funded. We find it interesting because, this is our life work. But it's very hard to call attention and bring awareness to this really shitty situation, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I mean, it's more entertaining.
It isn't. Honestly, there's no. It's just. Yesterday I had a patient come in and we ran their medication. They had like a deductible. So what a deductible is, you have to have X amount of spend. After you pass that spend, then all this tier structure and everything then goes into place. So up until then, you're paying out of pocket 100%. So this patient had a $250 deductible. They've never taken medications all year. It was for, I forgot what medication it was, but it was a $60 copay for a medication that cost like $25 or $30, I think. So it's almost double. If they use their insurance, they're paying $60. I was like, hey, do you want to pay $60 or, my cost for you out of pocket is, I think it was like $40. So I'm making like $10 because obviously the patient needed to get this medication. I'm like, I saw that and I'm like, there's literally no savings passed down. Like me as the pharmacy, I'm passing the savings down to this patient. If they just went through their insurance plan, they'd be paying $20 or $25 more for the same medication out of pocket. And when they get their refill next month, they're still not going to hit their deductible. So they're going to pay that $60 again. Like there is nothing where the patient's getting something back, which is disgusting. And they're the ones taking the medication. So until me howdy, we're giving Medicaid, we're giving money back to our patients that use our service, which is great.
Yeah, it's just hard to explain to people like, hey, we're giving you back free money, but the money is not the traditional money you think about. It's Bitcoin. That's
Right.
always what, throws off a lot of people. But I don't see any other way to do this.
No. Yeah. But I'm excited. I'm excited to see. Hopefully this catches traction. Let's I'm gonna stop sharing this. We'll split over to the next one.
Sure. Yeah, I'll do this one. This is the next article. Medicare and Social Security are responsible for 95% of the U.S. unfunded obligations. So normally we always talk about how Social Security is going to be bankrupt by the time we're like 65, right?
Yeah.
But you never hear that conversation really with Medicare. And that's because it's slightly funded in a different manner. But a lot of Medicare is actually funded by general funds from Congress.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think over the next 75 years, U.S. taxpayers face nearly 80 trillion in long-term unfunded obligations. What's more, 95% of this unfunded obligation is driven by only two federal government programs, Medicare and Social Security. Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, it was about like 400. The difference was about 400 trillion, I think, yeah,
Yeah, so normally
or
a lot
spend
of
versus
these,
revenue. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of these programs like Social Security, Medicare, Defense, even Medicaid, a lot of this is funded, by payroll taxes, but that only covers so much. And
Right.
the rest has to be, there's always going to be a shortfall every year. The only way to address that shortfall is Congress by passing another bill to prevent another government shutdown. It's
Which
something,
happens every year.
it's every year now, which is
Yeah.
absolutely crazy. And I actually read Medicare's trust report. They usually release one once a year to sort of talk about, is Medicare adequately funded for the next 5-10 years? And what's actually interesting is there was a suggestion that they would have to increase Medicare payroll taxes. I think everyone right now pays about 1.5 to 2%.
Yeah.
They're suggesting raising that, I believe, to 3% in the future years. One of the biggest unknown variables for Medicare is sort of determining, right, how much will services cost in the future? They actually attribute a lot of the expenses or increase in expenses to technology, new technology programs or adaptations in this industry. So if there's a new therapy that comes out, or if there's a new procedure that's much more technologically advanced, this raises the cost of business for Medicare. Yeah, I mean, Medicare and Social Security comprise 95% of the unfunded obligations. This is a really good chart right here.
So unfunded obligation. So like if you go back up to the chart with the spending and the revenue. So just to break it down for our audience, so this 400 and whatever 430 trillion of spending. This is how much, like, this is a good chart for like a balance sheet, but this is the left side is the spending and the right side is the revenue. So as you can see, the revenue is less than the spending. So we're overspending every single year. Now, is this essentially saying unfunded obligations, meaning that Social Security and Medicare, like all of this is getting funded and then Social Security and Medicare aren't getting any of the revenue? Is that what this is breaking down to say?
No, I don't think there's a preference in terms of like what's being paid out first.
Uh huh.
So actually, Medicare, it's actually funded by a trust.
Right.
So depending on if it's Medicare Part A, B, C, or D, it's funded by a certain trust.
Okay.
And that trust, it just holds treasury bonds. So it has treasury bonds collected through the last 5, 10, 15 years or so at different varying interest rates. So essentially, whatever the bonds print out, Medicare gets a stipend or coupon, and they're able to spend that on the program. But what's kind of interesting is if you have rates that are going up right now by the Federal Reserve, doesn't that mean that essentially the trust, which is holding bonds, they're becoming worth less and less? So how will that pay for future programs or future enrollments? I
Well,
don't know.
well, this is simple math. You have X amount coming out, and that's or X amount coming in, and whatever's going out is higher. You have a deficit by definition.
Yeah, and the thing to really point out here is that we collect, like I would say, the United States collects a lot of revenue from taxes. But if we're not collecting enough taxes, then how can we continue supporting some of these programs? It's kind of just basic, simple math. If you spend more than what you have coming in, then you're also going to hit bankruptcy at some point.
Right, but
So
then
to make
go
up
ahead.
that shortfall for unfunded obligations, you have to increase something. Is it going to be corporate taxes? Is it going to be Medicare payroll taxes? Is this Social Security taxes you're going to increase? Or are you going to increase the individual income tax? Which, by the way, it's already a lot right now. But I don't know if you remember, someone said income tax would only be transitory or temporary.
Inflation was transitory, right?
No,
Or
I'm
income
talking
tax.
about taxes. I heard
Oh,
that. Yeah, this is a very old quote. But it's either right. Do you increase the revenue side, or do you have to cut down spending? Do you reduce the amount of Social Security that goes out? Do you reduce the number of applicants or number of beneficiaries you have in the Medicare program?
in an ideal
These,
situation, it's both, right? You reduce the spending and you increase the revenue. That's
it's hard. I don't know how you answer this question. I'm not a politician. I don't sit here and make decisions on what we need to um, allow for spending. That's a hard question.
there needs to be like I listen to a lot of other like random podcasts, things like that. It's like spending needs to come down ultimately. Like I'm sure there's a way to decrease spending if the revenue is staying the same, or because the thing with increasing the revenue, if it's all taxes, it's just everyone's going to end up paying more in taxes, right? Which nobody wants to do.
But
So do you?
here's the thing: if you're the United States and you have the central bank, aka the Federal Reserve, and everyone's so reliant on the U.S. dollar, you need to use the U.S. dollar to settle funds if you're buying gas or oil in Dubai or Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
If you could just print money, then what's the point of having taxes?
Dude, we could do a whole like 7 hour segment about how the US just prints money and what it's doing to the economy.
I don't like. I really don't understand the point of taxes. Like, if you could just print as much money as you want without any repercussion, then why do we have taxes in the first place? It just seems like a very unnecessary step.
Well, the repercussions are there. It's just nobody's shedding any light on it, and the dollar's value is slowly declining, you know. But I know that's a hot take, and I know,
Very hot take.
yeah, I know a lot of people will be opposed to the dollar not being so valuable anymore, but it's happening whether we like it or not. As soon as we went off the gold standard and we just turned the printing press on, all of a sudden it's like you can just make as much money as you want. And therefore, everything just got more and more inflated, right? It's like, yeah, I don't know.
It just sucks because you and me, we're considered in the working class, right? We're
Right.
obviously not going to be covered under Medicare until we hit 65, which is many, many years from now. But it just sort of sucks because the people who have to fund this is the working class, the younger generation, whether it
Right.
be from individual income taxes, payroll taxes, whatever it is. It's just not sustainable.
No, it's not. The whatever's happened in the last like 10 years. If you scroll down a little bit, I thought this was really interesting. Go back up, right there. The financial report. So the financial report projects the debt to GDP ratio will be about 200% by 2046 and 566% by 2097. So 2046 is right around the corner in 20 years. We still won't be qualified for Medicare. We'll still be part of the working class. 2097, I don't know. I don't know if we're still going to be around. But 566% debt to GDP ratio. That's insane.
Yeah, that's actually where Japan is at right now. I think they're at like a 263% debt to GDP ratio. But normally, I mean, we got to break this down for the audience. Your debt should never exceed GDP. The
Right.
more debt you have compared to how much like you're producing, it's not a good sign for either a business or a country.
Right.
How do you handle this? Do you just print your way through this?
No, because
I don't know.
you're increasing that even more at the end of the day. Think about it, a 2-to-1 debt to GDP ratio versus a almost 6-to-1. So your debt is 6 times higher than what you're bringing in. In just simple terms, that's past being not sustainable. Like that's a recipe for disaster, right?
Yeah.
Has there been a time where when was the last time where it was the opposite? The GDP was higher than the debt within the U.S. history. Was it like 2000s
Oh, was
or
it?
90s?
Let's check that out. Yeah. So
It was in the 90s, right? I think.
90s, we were roughly hovering around 50 to 60%, which was pretty good.
Yeah.
It was much lower in the 70s. You were close to like mid 30s. Yeah, it's not a sustainable level, and I don't know how you get out of this.
There needs to be some zero. What is it? Zero-based budgeting that needs to be done. I think that's a great start
Luck.
because and it should. There's like so much unaccounted for funds and money that's just like, oh, we lost $7 billion or we overpaid you. I don't know how this happened, but it happened. We'll just write it off. It's like how is how is a world superpower country type running like this with this crazy lopsided balance sheet?
I know this might be slightly off topic, but I remember talking to someone about buying bonds. They were recommending me to buy bonds at my age right now. I was just like, why would anyone want to buy bonds in this environment? Interest rate keeps going up. The bonds you bought a year ago are practically have to be discounted like by 30-40% just to match today's bonds or treasury bill if you're buying one. Why? It's really weird to me. Like, I felt like that whole 60-40 portfolio of having like 60% equities and 40% bonds, that worked in a low GDP debt environment or low debt GDP ratio environment. And that's when interest rates were, decreasing.
Right.
But now it's like a very different story. Our debt to GDP ratio is exuberantly high and interest rates keep increasing. I don't think that 60-40 portfolio will continue to work.
It would have worked 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, maybe.
So here's this other article I wanted to share. United Health begins using an AI model with a 90% error rate to deny care, lawsuit alleges. For the largest health insurer in the United States, AI error rate is a feature, not a bug. That's honestly something I say to our developers. Like, yeah, it's a feature, not a bug. It's just funny because it's like, honestly, I don't know. Is it a bug? Like,
this is 100% a bug, but it's being definitely convoluted as a feature.
It's interesting that we're moving towards AI. I mean, it's going to happen, right? I mean, there's no doubting this is going to happen. But you're basically just going to have someone who's going to read all the inputs and see, will this get the determined output that we're looking for? I.e., here's a drug, I want it covered. It's not on formulary. I have to do a prior authorization. Will all these words that I say and these inputs and these numbers allow the output to approve this? And I think that's probably what you're seeing here. Does it make things more efficient? I don't know.
Well, I read through this. It was just like a lot of it. I was just like, wait, what? Did I read that right? If you go down to like right there. According to stat investigation, no, it's like two paragraphs up. So according to the stat investigation and lawsuit, the estimates are often draconian. For instance, on Medicare Advantage plan, patients who stay in the hospital for 3 days are typically entitled to up to 100 days of covered care in a nursing home. But with this AI prediction model, patients rarely stay in nursing homes for more than 14 days before receiving payment denials from United Health. So they're supposed to get about 100. They get about 14. That's a terrible ratio.
Yeah, it just sounds like they sort of just released this, model, and they're just saying, all right, let's just see if it works or not.
Yeah. Well, no, because it's like, I guess the algorithm, a lot of it went from patient outcomes to optimization of, how many patients can you get in, get out, and overturn essentially. So for being an AI model that was programmed to have best patient outcomes, but ultimately it learned and figured itself out to just make the most efficiency for the most cost savings and, revenue stream. It's like, that's just
It feels very Orwellian. Like, can you imagine a robot just says, hey, we're denying you care. We know you have all these problems. We're taking that into account, by the way. But we're just denying you care because it's just, not efficient. It's a very weird thing.
It's not efficient. No, and it was saying like, a lot of these, it said about 90% of the denials were reversed and overturned. But then 2 or 3 days later or a week later, they would stop paying again. You got to do the whole denial and appeal process all over again. So it's like the model is also correcting itself there, where it's like, all right, it got reversed and denied, but in a week, we'll just deny it again and go through the whole process again.
Skynet, it's becoming sentient. The use
The,
of
the,
faulty AI is not new for the healthcare industry. While AI chatbots and image generators are currently grabbing headlines and causing alarm, the healthcare industry in the US has a longer record of problematic AI use, including establishing algorithmic racial bias in patient care. But what sets this situation apart is that the dubious estimates spits out seem to be a feature, not a bug. How do you have racial bias in a model?
that looks like a whole nother article that we can deep dive into.
Yeah, might be a big one.
I think, I mean, AI has its place, and there's definitely going to be bugs or features that need to be worked out. But I don't think it should be implemented like this, as a try and fail. Because I read some of these cases where, like there was a patient that got denied care and then they won the appeal. And between the second denial and the patient ultimately passing away, they spent about $150 to keep them within the therapy and treatment program. The patient ultimately died, because the insurance wouldn't cover it. And you got to also keep in mind, this is an insurance plan that the patient has been paying into for years. Thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars. As you get older, the insurance gets higher. So this is thousands of dollars that they're paying in every month, and plus they got to spend another $150,000 out of pocket. So yeah. I think that's about all the time we have today, too, huh?
Yeah, that's it. Until next time. I think we're gonna podcast again this Sunday.
Yeah, we got another episode. This was a dense topic, a little boring one too, but I hope our audience got some red pill info. All right. So see y'all next time on the Orange Pill Club. Have a great weekend, and Friday we'll see you guys Sunday.
Later, guys.